Hi, I'm Tyson.
I'm Colin.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Adam.
And we're the Gamesmiths, and we're here to learn how to play the Great Nameless.
All right. At the center of all creation resides a mindless force of ultimate power and destruction, Zexhul. All of existence was spawned from its belly, and it has the capacity to swallow it all again at a moment's notice. Its most powerful progeny, 6 sibling gods, have desperately fought since the beginning of time to keep it sealed away in its home, Primo Regni. But one of the siblings has been slain, another absent for eons. Zexhul's appetite is insatiable, and everything it has created must eventually be destroyed. The Great Nameless is a game of divine might and celestial horror where players act as ex-cube, gods who have created realms and followers and attempt to seal themselves away from the incursion of their creator, Zexhul. Players accomplish their goals by playing cards that represent their worshippers, powers, and constructs. They seal themselves from invasion and initiate combat between themselves and Zexhul's armies. It is a cooperative game for 2 to 4 players and ages 12 and up, and playtime is roughly 30 minutes per player. So, objective. Cards are played from the Primo Regni deck on each player's turn. These cards will advance from the Primo Regni hex tile down to the player's Doom tracks, which are these guys. Primo Regni, by the way. Doom tracks. In a constant attempt to destroy the player's realm. Each player must use their cards and seals to block the advances of the cards generated within the Primo Regni hex tile. Cards. Seals. Oh, these are off camera. Seals. Each player must use their cards and seals to block the advances of the cards generated within the Primo Regni hex tile while simultaneously outscoring their opponents. To win the game, a player must either have seals, which are these guys, placed inside the Primo Regni hex tile, which is right here. So we're all going to kind of block the flow trying to come into our thing. And every other place along your board is one way to win. Or they must have the most victory points, which we're going to track by moving this little marker around the board at the end of the game. Players gain victory points by destroying cards or by having cards and seals in play when the game ends. Additionally, each realm has a bonus method for gaining points, which are printed directly on the realm tiles. So right underneath your realm name, you'll see yours. Mine is I gain 5 victory points every time I gain a Doom token. Everyone else, we can go over yours later. So just so everyone knows, we have the Primo Regni, Doom track, realm. Like I said, seals. Here are Doom tokens. You'll get those throughout the game. These are damage counters. They will count the amount of damage that each of your cards, which contain minions, will take, essentially. And when you, and then each person has their own deck that corresponds with their realm. So your icon on the back of your deck will match the icon on your board there. And then we have these tokens here. Each have their realm markers. We're going to use one of them to follow our progress around the board, and we're going to use the rest to mark like neutral things. Sometimes you'll get like a neutral minion in play that you control, and to mark that that one's yours, you'll use this stuff. So there's some things, you'll need to mark with that guy. So we've set the game up. In a perfect world, we wouldn't be sitting like a sitcom family and everybody would be seated around the board. But playing how we are, we have our Doom tracks that kind of lead into the Primo Regni here. So from the Primo Regni deck, we are going to set aside the Great Nameless and kind of put it in here on the top of the deck. We can do that before we actually start the game. It's not going to come up during the rules explanation. And we lay out the number of Doom tracks, everything like that. We've divided all the cards into their piles, so that's all set up. One thing to know is throughout the game, you will exert your cards by turning them 90 degrees. So that is exerted. Refreshed is simply put back up to kind of the standard orientation. Cards that are destroyed are placed in the discard pile, as well as cards that are discarded. If a card is condemned, that is removed completely from the game. So that's gone. So
is there one discard pile for everybody, or is
no,
there
everybody
a different
has
one for,
their own
everyone
kind
has
of
their own?
decks. Yeah.
Okay.
So discard is discard pile, condemned is removed from the game.
Okay.
And then we have refreshed and exhausted. So those are just some kind of basic turns. We have victory points. You can earn victory points a few different ways. Let me get some example here. One is through bounties. So when a player destroys an opposing player's entity or artifacts in combat, they will get a bounty that's on them. So this one is a 2. It's represented by kind of the watermark number behind the text. So this card is worth 2 victory points, essentially. So if any of my opponents were to destroy this card, they would get 2 victory points for doing so. And we'll go into how you do all that later. Controlling cards when the game ends will award their victory points. So in the same way as you guys destroying this will give you 2 points, if we reach the end of the game and he's still on the board, I get the 2 points for him being alive at the end of the game. Seals, which are these guys, they're worth 5 victory points, plus the number printed on the Doom track space they occupy. So if I put a seal here on this space, it's worth 5 points plus 1 additional one for being there.
Okay.
Your points are tracked along here. So if you score 5 points, just slide your little marker up 5 to mark where you're at. So everybody has their score going around their board here. And then there are the bonuses. Like I said, you have your bonus. Everybody can score bonuses. So those are the different ways that you score. There are a few different types of cards. One is entities, which I've already put down. Entities come into play and are considered persistents, which means once they are played, they remain in play. They may move, perform actions, and participate in combat from the time that they are played. Each one has a damage, which is represented by the starburst, health, which is represented by the heart, and movement ratings, which are represented by the boot. They also have different traits here, which is just kind of in the text that explains. They also have kind of a type as well. So this is an entity, army, cultist, and there are certain cards that will interact with cultists and certain cards that will interact with entities and armies. So when it says do something to an army or do something to an entity, you look at there to figure out if this card applies. And like I already discussed, they have their victory point values as well. A lot will have costs or entering the board actions. So when you enter, this one says you may take a cultist from any discard pile and put it into play, meeting all costs and resolving all entering the play effects. So that is that would be, so when I play this, essentially I can get a cultist from any discard pile. So I'd look for a card that's labeled cultist in anybody's discard pile, and I'd bring it into play as well. And then I would do any effects that that card has. There are also things like action effects or persistent effects that will persist throughout the game. We'll get to those in a second. There are 3 types of enemies, or I'm sorry, of entities. There are armies, which are the most common enemies. They're the mortal devout followers of the deity. There are champions. Let me find my champion here. There we go. There are champions that are elite, more powerful, most powerful creations of their excube. They are rare and have costs to bring into play. So this one here says cost, at least one player must have a doom token. So I can kind of play this Grave Lurk whenever I want to without anything. But to play the Daughter here, which is a much more powerful card, I want to make sure that at least one player at the table has a doom token. And then finally, there are avatars, which represent your excube. So each of us, so here's this one, Earthrasa, Light of the Sceptrum. And so this is essentially the like deity, that you're playing that represents the leader of your realm. And they are your most powerful card. These are physical manifestations of the excube themselves. They may never be controlled by any player other than the one that controls their realm, and they may never be condemned. They require special means to enter play to offset their extremely powerful stats and abilities. So that is your card. No one can steal it, and no one can remove it from the game completely. They generally have high costs, so you must control at least one non-universal entity and one non-universal artifact. To do that, they generally have persistent effects. We'll get into that a little bit later. There are also event cards. This one here says Vicious Attack. I'm not going to read what it does because then you guys will know what one of my events are. But they do things like each player must discard a card from their hand. Something like that. So events resolve immediately when they are played, and they go directly to the discard pile from the deck that they were played from. They have no stats, but have unique effects. We also have responses. Well, let's get to artifacts, actually. The last thing that you have are artifacts. They are also persistents, like your entities, meaning they'll stay on the board once they're played. Artifacts and must attach to an entity when it is played. The entity may be in any location and be controlled by any player as long as the cost is met. So I can play this artifact, that one says may only attach to an entity I control, so that's a terrible example. Here we go. No, wait, that's not an artifact. Let me find an artifact here real quick that has that. Maybe I don't. Here we go, artifact. This card will not attach to an avatar. So as long as you don't put this on an avatar, you can put it on any entity, whether or not you control it. It doesn't matter. The caveat is that as soon as it's played on an entity not controlled by the player, that entity's controller becomes the controller of the artifact. So if you were, for example...
Well, my thing is I gain a victory point for each persistent you control at the end of the game.
Exactly.
So if I were to have...
So if you were to play one of your artifacts on one of Colin's creatures, Colin would get a victory point for that because he now owns that persistent. So that's a great example. They also have a damage modifier, health modifier, and movement modifier. And they just simply change the stats of whatever entity they're attached to.
So is that in addition to, or it changes it to that?
In addition to. So they'll say +1, +2, -1.
Okay.
So this one is actually, So this one, I put this on this guy, and now he has 3 attack, 5 health, but 0 movement, because he lost a movement. Any effect that destroys or condemns an entity and collects its bounty also takes any artifact that's attached to it as well. So lost that, but the artifacts will have victory points as well on them. So if you destroy, that's the artifact. So this artifact has a 3 victory point to it. This is a 2. So if someone's going to come along and destroy this guy now, they would get 5 victory points, essentially, for destroying this combination. Artifacts in the Primo Regni deck have predetermined parameters to which entities they will attach to. These may attach to Primo Regni-controlled entities or player-controlled enemies, whichever meets the requirements of the card. So we're also going to get artifacts out of here. The last type of card that we have is a response. Responses are played as reactions to a trigger, so they are the only card or ability able to be played by a player on someone else's turn. So responses is the only thing you can do when it's not your turn. There are no limitations to the number of responses that can be played in a turn, as long as there is an appropriate trigger. So this one will say, after a seal prevents a Zexul-controlled entity from marching, destroy that seal. So as long as the condition is met, which is the seal was preventative thing from moving, which we'll get into later, then I can play this card. You know, if that didn't happen, I can't just play this card for no reason. I have to meet the conditions of playing it. So all of your responses will have a condition for being played. As long as that condition is met, you can play as many of them as you'd like. But they will follow priority, essentially. So whoever turn it is to go first will play theirs, and then everybody will get a chance to kind of respond. And then if nobody responds, we're done.
Is it like in a round robin?
Yeah,
Kind
so
of
it'll
like,
essentially
like
kind
one,
of keep
two,
going.
three,
Yeah,
4.
and everybody will have a chance to essentially keep adding responses until we're done responding, and then we will resolve each of the responses in order. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Do you have your avatar? Actually, pull that out real quick, and we'll go over the cards. So damage modifier, we went over. Health modifier, we went over. Damage is the amount of damage they do. Health is the amount of damage that they take. Damage is persistent. So, you know, if you take 5 damage on one turn, you would get a 5 damage marker on this card, and when eventually you get to 14 damage, this card would leave. Card would be condemned, and whoever got the last piece of damage on it would get the 5 victory
Except the
points
avatars can't
associated
be
with it.
condemned.
I'm sorry, not condemned. Discarded, destroyed. Yeah, not condemned. I actually forget what is it condemned? Discard, yeah, destroyed. So, title, we went over that. I think
heal
we went over
damage?
everything. I'm not entirely sure. There might be cards, I haven't looked over all the cards. There might be cards that allow you to heal, but I don't think anything, or there might be effects that allow you to heal, but it doesn't happen naturally. So we have traits here, or no, I'm sorry, we discussed that. The abilities is the thing I wanted to discuss. So enter abilities, which we talked about, happen whenever you basically when you play the card for the first time and it enters the game. Phase, these abilities can be performed during their controller's phase during that turn. So this one has an action that happens during the refresh phase, so it says refresh, and this one has an action that happens during the action phase, so it says action. This one here just has a cost and an enter. The last, they're also each phase, which means they can be performed during every turn, which as long as the entity is not exerted. I'm sorry, I need to point that out. If the entity is exerted, things don't happen. So if this entity is exerted before the action phase, its action doesn't happen. And then response, these abilities can be triggered anytime the conditions are met, just like a response, as long as the enemy is not exerted. So essentially, if it's exerted, it doesn't do its thing, with the exception of passive abilities. Passive abilities are in bold and happen no matter what, even if the entity is exerted. If this card is equipped with any artifacts, you may trigger their abilities twice per turn. So that's what this guy does, and even if he's exerted, that happens. That is just a permanent effect. Permanent effects are always in bold and just shown on the cards. There's no phrase, they're just the words that are in bold, and you know that is permanent. Any given ability can only be triggered once per turn, and they cannot be triggered while the card is exerted. There's some italic text at the bottom there that is the flavor text, just adds a little bit of story and flavor to the game. And then, as we discussed, the watermark number in the background is its
Bounty.
victory point value, either bounty or points at the end of the game for having it. Universal cards have the same anatomy and work the same way as cards present in all players' decks. So those are going to be these cards in here, these cards here. Anytime a player would be able to play an entity, artifact, or event on the turn, they instead may play a universal card from the table. These cards count as playing a card in all ways. So if you've already done your thing for the turn, you can't. You're allowed to essentially play one follower and one artifact per turn. And so if you've already played a follower out of your hand, you can also play a universal follower. You can play a universal artifact, but not a universal follower. So, sequence of play. Here's how the turns go. Number 1, we refresh all cards. I'm sorry, there's the Primo Regni phase. Quick note, we skip this on the first turn. So first turn, there's no Primo Regni phase. Other than that, we refresh all cards controlled by Zexhul. So all of the Primo Regni cards, all the enemy cards essentially that are on the table, will refresh. Then you play the top card, and each player does this. You play the top card of the Primo Regni deck, just kind of flip it over.
Hi, Tyson here. I just wanted to cut in and say that we made a small error in explaining this part. While the phases must be resolved in order, the actions within a phase may be resolved in any order. So, for example, the refresh action does not need to be the first action you take during the Primo Regni phase. You may first choose to play or march, or do any order of these things.
If the deck is ever empty, needs to be played, shuffle the deck. If it is an event, resolve it and place it in the Primo Regni discard. If it's an artifact, make sure the costs are met and attach it to the appropriate entity as directed. Discard if it cannot be met. And if it is an entity, make sure the costs are met, discarding it if it is not. Resolve any enter abilities and then put into play Primo Regni card. If there are any Zexhul controlled entities already in the Primo Regni, who's here, place the new card on top of it. This is called a heap. March the top entity from the heap into your number 3 Doom square. So essentially you're going to flip this over, and then you take the top entity and march it, which just means move it 1 space into yours. So this would be mine. I'm going to move it here to the number 3 spot on my track. If any Zexhul entities occupy a spot that's already taken, they get pushed, essentially. So if this guy's going to march into my number 3, this guy's already in my number 3, this guy will get pushed into my number 2. Simple enough. Entities cannot march past a seal. So if I have a seal up right here and it marches in here, nothing gets pushed. I just form a new heap at this seal, and they're more or less stuck here.
Do you have to be placing your seals in order? So the first seal you place here, then here, then here. You can't just go straight to placing a seal here, right?
You can actually. You can place the seals wherever you like. You just have to have I believe so. We'll double check. But I believe that you can place the seals wherever you like, but you have to have a entity in that spot. So you have to get an entity, move it into that spot. It's probably going to have to survive combat and then be able to place a seal. And so, yeah. So it's a little trickier than that, but we'll get into placing seals. Yeah. So throughout the game, you might collect Doom tokens. We'll go into them later, but they're bad. At the conclusion of your Primo Regni phase, you may choose to get rid of a Doom token in your possession by resolving an additional Primo Regni phase. So essentially flip over a second card from this deck, deal with that, and then you get to remove one of your Doom tokens. So it means you got two entities coming at you, or 2 events coming at you, something, you know.
Okay.
Perform any refresh abilities. No, I'm sorry. After you do that, and maybe do an additional one to get rid of a Doom token, then you are going to go to your refresh phase. You refresh all cards you control, so turn them back up, right? Perform any refresh abilities, so this one has a refresh ability on it, so I'll do that. And then draw the top 2 cards of your deck. If you ever run out of cards, shuffle your deck, draw the rest of the cards that you were supposed to draw, and gain a Doom token. So that's one of the ways you get Doom tokens, is going through your deck once. This is true. Any card needs to be drawn, but there is no card in the deck, not just during your refresh phase. You have to draw for any reason. Your pile's empty. You refresh. You draw what you're supposed to draw. Take a Doom token. During your action phase, you can play an event, entity, or artifact from your hand or from one of the universal piles. Then you can play a second card from your hand or from one of the universal piles, as long as it's a different type from the first. So there are 3 types of cards essentially: entities, artifacts, and events. you get to play 2 of the 3 every turn. Make sense to everyone?
Okay.
But you can play events on someone else's. Or no, those are.
Only responses can be played
Yeah,
on other
the
people's
responses.
turns.
Oh, okay.
Responses
Yeah,
are on
okay.
other people's turns. So the 3 that you generally play during your turn,
Yeah, events, artifacts, and
right,
entities.
as far as you're just like your main actions, you get 2 main actions, and they essentially have to be different. And your 3 options are event, artifact.
What about starting
entity.
hand size?
I'm not 100% sure, but we'll get to that in the setup when we start the game.
Okay.
But you draw 2 cards every turn. Perform any action abilities. Okay, then there's the action phase, essentially. So you play 2 cards, then you have your action phase. So this guy has an action phase. I can discard the top of my deck, and I get a bonus if I do that. And so I can perform that if I wanted to during the action phase. The next thing you can do is seal. You can put a seal on one place, up to one place where it says place seal here. So there's your realm gate, which we'll get into, so you can seal off your realm gate, or any place along the track here, as well as, it's hard to see with the way that we have it laid out, but you should be connecting to the realm here, and then each player is also allowed to place a seal right there. So you can essentially, for our purposes, we're going to put the seal right here, just to represent what's going on for our game. But that will represent you essentially putting a seal here, which will stop any entities from coming towards your doom track at all. You must have a seal in your collection, so you have to get one. They can only be collected by from the central pool by card effect. So you have to first get a seal into your possession somehow. Seals block Zexul's march, other players' entities, and provide victory points. So like I said, you put a seal down here in your number 3 spot, you're going to get 3 victory points plus 5. For this, you'll get 8 points for laying that down. They may not be destroyed in combat, but there are effects in the deck that specifically destroy them. Placing a seal requires a player to control at least one refreshed entity in the space to be sealed. The entity performing the sealing loses any movement it has left for the turn. The seal is taken from the player's collection and placed on a space on the board, then is marked with a realm marker. So you place the seal and then mark it with a realm marker to show that it's your seal. Seals may not be placed in any space that contains an entity not controlled by the current player. So essentially, if you're going to place a seal in spot number 2, you have to kill all of the baddies in spot number 2 before you can
And
seal
actually
spot number 2.
be there with one of your.
So you're going to have to have so you have to have a refreshed entity with no enemy entities and a seal in your possession, and then you can say, I'm going to seal here.
Gotcha.
And this guy can normally move 3 spots, so if I move him 1, 2 spots and put him here, and then seal this, I lose that last movement point that he has. By sealing this, he's put his turn there.
Does that mean that he cannot go through a seal either?
No, enemy entities cannot move. So that's why I mark this as my seal, and I'm free to move
Gotcha.
through this seal however I please.
So can I put a seal in your doom track?
Yes, I don't see why not. As long as you meet all the conditions, none of my entities are there, none of
How do I get onto your
Zexul's
doom
enemies
track?
entity are there. We'll get into that when we get into moving, which is what we're about to do now. So play, perform, seal, and then move. So actually you have to seal before you move. So you would have to have this
That guy
entity
down
already
first.
in 2, then seal, but sealing means he can't move for the turn. So I guess that's a better way. My first example wasn't exactly that good. Move any number of units that you control. It costs 1 movement point essentially to move from any space to any other space. So from a realm to a realm gate, from a realm to a doom track, from a doom track to another space on a doom track, or from a realm gate to another.
So this is how I get to your.
So yeah, so you would put an entity here in the realm gate, and so, oops, this is an artifact. we have this entity here. It starts off here. I'm going to use 1 movement to move it into my realm gate. I'm going to use 2 movements to move it into your realm gate, and then I'm going to move a 3rd movement to move it into your realm.
Okay.
And so that's my 3 movements for the turn.
And so either one of us could seal this one.
Correct.
So you could prevent me from getting into my realm gate.
Correct.
And I could prevent you from
Correct.
coming into my realm.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can seal that off defensively. I can lock you in your realm, and you can't come out. But then
Do you
no one
know
else
if you
can
have to
come
be in my realm to seal here, or if you have to be in my realm gate to seal here?
I believe it is in the realm gate, because the realm gate is what has the seal
Okay.
around it. So it costs 1 movement point. We went over that. If they are controlled by different players, either player with a refreshed entity may choose to initiate combat. If that happens, currently moving entity must stop. So essentially, if you have one of your entities in this realm gate, and I go here, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go 1, and then I'm going to go 2, and you can say, stop, I'm going to fight you when you come through. Or you can say, or I can say, I move here and I attack you, or you say you attack me when I move in. Either one of us can initiate
neither of
combat.
us say anything,
If
you
neither
can
of us
keep
say
going.
anything, I can keep moving into your realm.
Okay.
Interesting.
If the entity is controlled by Zexul, then it will always initiate combat as long as it's not exerted. Like I said, exerted enemies, so if you're exerted, I walk through, you can't start combat.
Could you fight me if I?
Yeah.
I believe so,
Probably.
yes. If they're controlled by different players, either player with a refreshed entity may choose to initiate combat. Yes.
Okay.
Entities may not normally move through another player's seal, but may always move through a seal controlled by its owner. And movement does not exert entities or preclude the use of other abilities. A note about invasion, which there are things that trigger on invasion. Anytime an entity enters a realm not owned by its controller, it is considered invading, regardless of the motive. This is only considered an invasion when the force enters the realm itself, not the gate on the edge of the realm tile. On successive turns, if these entities remain in the realm, they are not invading again. It only occurs the first time an entity moves into a realm.
Okay.
Invasion has no inherent effect, but several card mechanics that interact with it. Invasion is also not limited to a player versus player. Any player can also invade the Primo Regni, and Zexul can invade any player-controlled realm.
Okay.
So, if combat has been initiated, this is how combat goes. The following steps must be resolved in order. Number 1, respond with realm tiles, cards in play, or cards in hand. So if there's something in your realm tile that lets you do something, whatever, you can respond. The active player has the first opportunity to play a response. Move clockwise to each other player with the opportunity to respond. After all players have the opportunity, the Primo Regni will always respond if appropriate. If it may respond more than once, the active player chooses which response it uses. Repeat the steps above until all parties have passed on the opportunity to respond. If either side no longer controls any units in combat, skip to resolution. So there are some responses that can destroy units, and so if that happens, we just skip the combat. Damage is pooled and assigned. Each participant adds up the amount of damage they can deal with their damage first unit. So some units say damage first, which means they will do exactly that, damage first. If that damage kills the unit that they're attacking, that unit will not have an opportunity to do damage back. Zexul will always, when you're dealt damage, you place the equivalent number of wound tokens on their entities. Each participant assigns damage first they receive and split it up in any way. So if there are, if Tyson has 2 entities in here and I'm fighting them and I attack and I say I do 4 damage, you can decide, does 2 damage go on here and they die and then the other 2 go on this guy, or do you put all 4 on this guy, or however you want to do it. So you decide, I do 4 damage to your units. You
And I
decide how the
distribute it.
damage is
Okay.
distributed. Zexhul, when there's a heap and you're fighting a heap of Zexhul enemies, Zexhul will always assign the damage to the enemy on top until it's dead, and then you'll go to the next one. So
And there's no loss of damage either.
there's no damages. Yes, damage
So
remains
you don't
on
kill the
card.
first guy and then you're out of damage. It
You
will-
stay in you stay in battle for the next round, kind of thing like that. And so you kind of all pool
Well,
damage.
I mean, doing 4 damage to a 3, all 4 doesn't go to killing him. You do 3 to him and
then one to him. Yes. And then there is the normal damage phase. If an entity does not say normal damage or damage first, or I'm sorry, if an entity doesn't say damage first or damage last, then it can be assumed to have normal damage. And then, like I said, there is damage last, which is the same. So there's damage first. We check to see if anybody dies.
Slow.
There's damage. We check to see if anybody dies. There's damage last. Check to see if anybody dies. Then we resolve combat. Each player may choose to displace, which means removing to their home realm any number of their surviving entities. So if you get in a bad fight, everyone's almost dead, you're like, okay, I retreat. I'm done. We survived
So
this round
even
of
if you're all the
combat.
way in 3, you have
Right,
to go
you
all the
just
way back
retreat.
here.
Exactly.
Okay.
Entities controlled by Zexhul will not displace at all, so enemies just stay. The only cards that can be played from hand during combat are responses, and exerted enemies do not contribute damage. Exerted artifacts will still grant all attribute rating bonuses to the entity to which they are attached, but if that entity is exerted, it will still contribute no damage. If we need any clarification, there's a thing that explains combat kind of step by step, and we can check that out. The last thing is the end phase. You'll perform any end abilities on your cards. So some cards might say, right one here, that says each end, if this card occupies a doom track that contains a seal, destroy that seal. So that's what that thing does. That seems nasty, and it does damage last. You see right there. Discard down to 8 cards in hand if you currently hold more than that. Check to see if any realms are lost or sealed. If all realms are lost or sealed, we'll get into what lost means. We'll get into ending the game, and then check to see if an accumulated player has or if a player has accumulated more victories than the agreed upon goal. So I believe I think it's like 40 or 35. We'll get to it in a second. After each player's end phase is concluded, play proceeds to the next player sitting to their left. When all players' turns have concluded, another round begins. So we go round and round. Doom tokens. So if Doom tokens are in the central pool, they have no effect. However, while they are in any player's possession, each Doom token grants +1 damage rating bonus to every Zexhul-controlled entity in play. So the more Doom tokens we have, the more powerful all of these guys are.
Is that each individual or each Doom token controlled by any one of us?
By any one of us.
So
if as a
Tyson
group,
and Colin each have one, I'm still taking
you're
+2 from...
correct.
You better not.
Get so many Doom tokens.
I'm just going to shuffle through my deck like 10 times.
Every Doom token also subtracts 5 victory points from the player holding it at the end of the game.
Can you go negative?
Take that.
Well, if it gets down to which of us has the least negative amount of points, we've played a very
I
spiteful
just meant
game.
at the start of the game, how easy is it to get Doom tokens?
No,
And
there's no...
I don't know if there's a lot of ways to intentionally get them other than we're going over
Shuffle
right
through
here.
the deck.
There are several ways to gain Doom tokens. Shuffling. Anytime a player shuffles their deck for any reason, that player gains a Doom token. Right? I'm sorry.
Doom tokens.
I skipped
right
over
now.
some stuff, so I'm sorry. However, a player may remove Doom tokens by spending them during their Primo Regni phase. The Doom token is discarded and the player resolves another one. This can be done any number of times in a turn.
So you could get rid of like 5 Doom tokens, but then you have to get
Fight
5.
5 enemies, yeah.
Wow.
There are several ways to gain tokens. Number 1, shuffling. Anytime a player shuffles their deck for any reason, that player gains a Doom token. Number 2, Primo Regni. Anytime the Primo Regni deck is shuffled, all players gain a Doom token.
Whoa. Spooky.
Discard from hand. If a player must discard from hand but has no cards left in hand, they gain a Doom token for each card they cannot discard. Discard from deck. If a player needs to discard from deck but has no deck left, they must draw and then discard, which necessitates a shuffle, which will get you a...
So you get a Doom token and for shuffling and a Doom token for each card you're supposed to discard.
from hand. But if you're supposed to
from
discard
deck,
from
though.
deck but has no deck left,
It just works as a shuffle.
then they
Okay.
shuffle and then have to discard from deck, and that
It's not an
shuffle will
additional
gain you a
penalty.
token.
Okay.
And then effects. Many cards will directly call for the collection of Doom tokens. So, bad news bears. Losing one's realm. If an entity controlled by Zexhuel marches into a realm, there is a response printed on the Primo Regni tile that will... lost where I was. That will cause the player to lose their realm. When this happens, condemn all cards that the player owns that are in their hand, deck, and discard pile. Discard all seals that that player collected and destroy all seals that they have in play. Subtract any victory points due to Doom tokens and return those Doom tokens to the board. Displace any entities or artifacts still present on that gate. Destroy any entities still present on that Doom track or realm. And destroy any other player's seals on that realm tile. On successive turns, essentially you are out of the game, except
Sounds like it.
on successive turns, that player cannot be affected by Primo Regni or any other players in any way and may not gain Doom tokens. That player is not entirely eliminated from participation, however. That player still has a Primo Regni phase. The difference is, on their turn, the lost player now chooses the Doom track that will receive the marching entity and which player is affected by any event targeting the current player. So essentially your Primo Regni phase still happens. So if Adam's eliminated, he'll still flip over a minion on his turn,
And then he
but then
chooses
he'll
who it
pick
goes
which
to.
one of us it marches at. And if he flips over an event that says the current player discards a card, since the current player's him, he chooses one of us to discard a card.
So basically,
So he
instead of
gets to
Zexhuel-
hang out and yeah,
That's nice you're still involved.
Right.
I hate when you get eliminated from the game and then you're just out.
right? So finally, ending the game. There are 3 ways to end the game. Every realm is lost, or a seal has been placed, or has a seal placed in the Primo Regni. So either the realm is gone, or we have a seal here, or like I said, we're going to represent it here on our board.
So you don't need a seal in every spot.
Technically,
you
no.
just need to
You
get
do
into
not.
Primo right.
If you have, well, yes and no. So that's every realm is sealed or lost. So if you have your seal here, Tyson has his seal here, Colin's eliminated from the game, but I'm still here and mine's not sealed, the game continues.
Okay.
As
But
soon
we
as I
can
put a
place-
seal here, then it stops.
But I
Oh,
can
and then
place
it's
a seal in your area, right?
Well,
Yes, you
but
could.
you have to have an entity in his
Right.
area.
But my
Right.
question is,
But how
when-
do you do that?
if
How
you
do
get to
Through the
Primo
realm
Through the
gate.
realm gates.
can you get to Primo Regni?
You move
and-
your
Oh, so
guy.
you do an invasion into
You-
their area and
exactly.
then
It
you can
takes
jump up?
one move.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Yeah.
realize.
Right. So you can go from your realm to your realm gate, then into someone else's realm gate, then into their realm, and then up their doom track.
Okay.
Can you access their realm through, or their Doom track by going
I
to
believe
Primo
so.
Regni
You can move
into
through
other-
Primo Regni. If you end your phase in the Primo Regni, it destroys all player entities in the Primo Regni. So you don't want to stop there.
Right, you
But
have
you
to have
can
enough
move through.
movement
Yeah,
to be
I
able
don't
to.
see anything
Gotcha. Okay.
That doesn't allow.
Dad
And you
will
have to
kill
move
you.
into.
Yeah.
So to place
So you
this
can
seal
move
here.
like so I can move to the Primo
he's like
Regni
the
and
dad
then
of
to
the
Tyson's
gods,
through the
yeah.
other way
Isn't that
too.
how the story
Okay.
goes?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. He's
our
the
dad,
creator.
right? Yeah.
Yes, he's the
But
creator
not if there's
of,
a
the-
seal
of
there.
everything, and then
Right.
we are the first generation of children.
Of gods.
Yes, we're the gods. Then a player reaches the predetermined number of victory points with 4 players. It is 40. And then the
Guy
last way
names
is a player
class.
is fully sealed, which means they have a seal in the Primo Regni and every space along their Doom track.
What was the second one? Someone reached what?
40 points. So
Oh.
either everybody is sealed here,
And then we just
or
count
their realms
whoever
are
has the
gone,
most
and then
points.
whoever has the most points at that point wins.
Okay.
First person to 40 also wins. Or if you manage to seal the whole thing, so you get seals here, here,
Right.
here, and here.
And here.
No, not there.
I thought it said there too.
Um,
Double check that.
They have a seal in the Primo Regni and all 3 spaces on their Doom track.
Oh.
Victory points are irrelevant in this case. That player wins the game immediately.
Oh.
So if you manage to get all 4 of those seals on your track, you just win.
Is it a hard stop at 40 as well?
Yes.
Unless-
I'm sorry, finish the round.
Okay.
So if Adam's going first,
Because somebody
So if
might
we
be able
all
to destroy a
exceed
seal.
40, whoever
So you
exceeded
could be
it by
like,
the
no,
Right.
I'm destroying that
so
one.
yeah, if Adam's going first and Adam gets to 40, then
or 42.
or 42, then the turn is over at that round. We'll play out. Colin will get to have the last turn, and then
If someone gets over 42, they
right, and then if Colin manages to get 43 on
whatever.
that turn, he wins the game. Otherwise, yeah, we just see. who
But
has
the
most
gates are
points.
hard stop.
The gates are a hard stop. If Adam places that 4th gate on his turn, game over immediately. He wins. And then, so that's pretty much the end of it. Any questions? Oh, and just to score, at the end of the game, add the following to the current total already on each player's track. Get an extra 5 victory. The victory point value on all cards they control at the end of the game, plus 5 victory points for every seal in their collection, plus 5 victory points for every seal they control in play, as well as bonuses equal to the Doom track space they occupy, plus 5 additional for any seal they control in the Primo Regni, so it's 10 for putting one in the Primo Regni, minus 5 for every Doom token in that player's possession, and see realm tiles for any further modifications. There are some tiebreakers. If all the scores are totaled, if more than one player has the same point total, the players with more seals at the end of play, the more seals in play is the winner. If they have the same number of seals, the player with the most seal points is the winner. If this is also the same, the player with the fewest Doom tokens is the winner. And if this is also the same, then the game is a tie. So that is that.
So,
Any other
do you
questions?
see motivation for getting into somebody else's realm and into their Doom track?
Yeah, I mean, stopping them. Stopping them from
Getting this set up.
getting that set up, breaking their seals.
Stopping them from getting something in here
You
to
know.
prevent the end of the game.
If someone's moving too fast, like you can essentially seal them out of their own Doom track. So I could come in here and put a seal in yours if you're getting out of control, and you'd have to deal with that.
You
before
could
win the
also
game.
theoretically get blocked in by somebody else.
Right.
So somebody could seal your track, and then you have to go through the gate of somebody else's to get somewhere.
Okay.
So, and you also, like I said, get points for killing other people's
Right.
minions and stuff like that. So I think it's a strategy if you want to be offensive or defensive. Okay. Any other questions?
That's it, I don't think
All
so.
right. Looks good. That's the rules, and we'll see you in the game.